everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology. And today we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the release of the album Manassas by Stephen Stills and Manassas. If you go look for this in your streaming services, I think you're gonna find it cataloged under Stephen Stills. So if you do a search for Stephen Stills, you'll find this album under him. But anyway, we're going to call it Stephen Stills and Manassas. The name of the album is Manassas. It was recorded in Miami, my backyard, in late 1971. It's a double album that was released on April 12th, 1972. This is an album that's been in Bob's wheelhouse for a long, long time. So Bob's going to tell us all about it. Take it away, Bobby.
All right. Thank you, Scotty. So this is the album, Stephen Stills and Manassas. I bought this brand new in '72, and I still have it lying around. So a little background that led up to this album. So by 1971, Stephen Stills already has a pretty good name for himself, starting from his membership in Buffalo Springfield, that seminal 1960s band in which Stills wrote one of the most renowned songs of the 60s protest movement called For What It's Worth. Then he becomes part of the supergroup Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Sometimes Young. Then he did a couple successful solo albums. 1970s solo album gave us the hit Love the One You're With. 1971 solo album came up with the hit song Change Partners. So by 1971, Stills has a cabin in Colorado, where he's making his home. And he goes to a nightclub in Boulder, Colorado to catch a show by what was left of the Flying Burrito Brothers, a country rock band. And Chris Hillman was in Flying Burrito Brothers. And Chris Hillman has a history dating back to the Byrds. Then he went into the Flying Burrito Brothers. The Burrito Brothers went through a ton of personnel changes. So by 1971, it's kind of a remnant of the original band. And anyway, Stills catches their show at this club in Boulder. Really impressed with what he saw. After the show, he goes up to Chris Hillman and says, "Hey, I think you ought to come and join me and bring your guitarist Al Perkins with you." So Hillman is kind of thinking it over. Stills makes a follow-up phone call later, and Hillman says, "Okay, fine, we'll do it." So he and Perkins head out to Colorado. They hook up with Stephen Stills. And Perkins and Hillman join Stills and Stills' touring band of the time, which had Dallas Taylor on drums, Fuzzy Samuels on bass, Paul Harris on keyboards, and Joe Lala on percussion. And if you're really knowledgeable of classic rock, you probably recognize Dallas Taylor's name and Fuzzy Samuels. They both did a lot of work with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Anyway, that was Stills' touring band. So with the addition of Hillman and Perkins, we now have a 7-piece group counting Stills. Stills has got a vision for music that he wants to do. So they head down to Florida. And you, Scott, you may or may not know this, but Stills is actually a native Floridian. So he heads back to home territory and they start recording this music. And one of the things that Stills incorporates in here is a lot of Latin rhythms because he was familiar with that music from having grown up in Florida. And Stills had enough material that they ultimately wound up doing a double album as their premiere. And all of the songs on this album are written by Stills, or he collaborates with some of the members of the group. There was only one cover song on the album, and that's a song called Bound to Fall, which was written by Mike Brewer of Brewer and Shipley fame. The music on this album blends rock, blues, country, folk, and Latin rhythms. And being a double album, originally on vinyl, there were 4 sides. And each side was given a title and kind of a theme. Side 1 is called The Raven, and it's a composite of rock and Latin sounds. Side 2 was called The Wilderness, and those were country and bluegrass tunes. Side 3 was called Consider, and that consisted of some folk and folk rock tunes. And then side 4 was called Rock and Roll Is Here to Stay. And those were rock and rock blues tunes including a song called Blues Man, which was a tribute to Jimi Hendrix, Al Wilson of Canned Heat, and Duane Allman. The album was a success, both critically and commercially. It peaked at number 4 on the US Billboard album chart. And overall, at the end of 1972, it was number 53. It was the number 53rd best-selling album in the US. They only released 2 singles off the album. They did, okay. It Doesn't Matter peaked at number 61 on the Billboard charts, and then the song Rock and Roll Crazies got to 92. So this really wasn't an album that had singles to it. You know, this was something that it was an album thing you bought. You didn't buy singles off of this album. The music on the album ranges all over the place, and there's something here that anybody should like. You've got rock, blues, Latin, country, bluegrass. So I really liked this album at the time. I still like it. I think it's held up well. I know, Scott, there's going to be stuff on here that's not going to be in your wheelhouse, but I probably like side 2 the best, the country and the bluegrass stuff. There's some great songs on there. Colorado is a really nice song about, living in Colorado. Fallen Eagle is a great song about, environmental issues.
You're trolling me, aren't you? Because side two is where when I was going and listening to this album, side 2 is where I got about the middle of side 2. I'm going. So you just said that to troll me. Go ahead.
I did. And side 2 is where you really see the Chris Hillman influence. Not that Stills wasn't into that kind of music initially, but that's where the Hillman influence really kicks in big time. And if you listen to Stills' solo albums, he got into a lot of musical genres when he was doing that, when he was doing his solo stuff. And in Crosby, Stills, and Nash, I think Stills was the one who lent the rock element to what they did. And then, of course, that was enhanced, when Neil Young hooked up with them. Side 3, considered the folk rock side, has got a really nice song called Johnny's Garden. And actually, Stills wrote that song about the caretaker of an English estate that he had bought that had one time had been owned by Ringo Starr. So there's a lot of variety on the album. Stills is a great guitarist, in my opinion, a great songwriter, and he's got a different voice. Okay, he's not a classic singer, but I think he's got a voice that really works. The band went out on tour. They were together for a couple years, had successful tours, and they were known for doing shows that could run up to 3 hours in length. And they would come out and start their shows with the full band, and then they would segue into Stills doing some solo acoustic stuff on stage. And then Hillman and Perkins would come out and do a bluegrass thing. And then the whole band would come back out and end the show with a rock blues set. So audiences got the full flavor of this album in those shows. Interestingly, Stills claims that the album was not supported as well as it should have been by their record company, Atlantic, and by Atlantic Records head Ahmet Ertegun. And Stills claims that once this album went gold, Atlantic pulled it and you couldn't buy it back in the day. And Stills claims that Atlantic did that because they wanted to try to force him back into what Stills calls the gold mine of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Now, true or not, I don't know. And so anyway, I like it. I think it's a great album. I think it really showcases Stills' talent as a songwriter and as a guitarist. Apparently, he was kind of an interesting taskmaster when they were recording this. I read stories about how he would go wake people up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's go to the studio." And then finally, at one point, they kind of rebelled and said, "Steve, we want regular hours." And I read one place where one of the engineers working on this said that they would do these marathon recording sessions, and they had one session that ran 106 straight hours. So they must have been a lot of speed being taken or something for them to have that kind of an endurance. Anyway, Manassas, the title for the group, Stills was a Civil War buff. So he came up with the name Manassas because that was the site of a couple pretty famous Civil War battles. And the cover photo shows all 7 musicians standing at the train station in Manassas Junction, Virginia. And he flew everybody up there from Florida to take that picture. Again, as part of him being a Civil War buff. Manassas had about a good 2-year run. They did a follow-up single album called Down the Road. It sold respectably, but not as well as the original album. And then Manassas kind of ended their run and everybody went their separate ways after that. If you want a good shot of what Stills was doing in the early 70s, it's a great place to go. I would definitely recommend you give a listen to it. And like I say, you're going to find a little bit of everything on here as far as musical styles. So I recommend giving it a listen.
Yeah, this is just coincidentally, yeah, it was recorded in Miami, which, I'm up in Broward County, so I'm about 50 miles away from Miami. And then Manassas, a little town in Arlington County, Virginia, where I used to live. And that was about 30 miles from where I used to live in Northern Virginia. And but as we were saying, so Manassas, the only thing that makes us that gives us any tie really to Manassas is basically the photo and the name of the band, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah. Which, okay, whatever. Yeah, that's funny when you said it. I'll go back to, it's like all of a sudden I was listening to the first side. I was listening to it on streaming, so no sides, but as I was progressing through the album, it was like the first few tracks is, okay, that's kind of what I expected to hear from Stephen Stills in the early 70s. And then I started getting into fiddles and hoedowns and weepy Jesus gospel songs. It's like, okay, I'm checking out of this. But then I went back and started over. Just kind of grabbed my armrests and held on through a few of those songs to get through a few of those songs, and started getting back into things that are a little more palatable to me. And actually that those last 4 tracks, where they started playing a little rock music. Well, okay, yeah, that found a little place in my brain where I actually found some enjoyment there. But that's just it really did take me back to the early 70s and that whole country rock movement, with Flying Burrito Brothers and Poco and things like that. It took me back to that era. It's not an era that I paid that much attention to, but I do have memories of that, and it took me back there. And that's that's kind of sort of that mood is kind of what you can expect if you go listen to this for the first time. It'll take you back to that early 70s Laurel Canyon era, and if you're into that, this will be a good album for you. Final thoughts, Bob?
Yeah, just a couple things. I'm the guy that can listen to Black Sabbath and then segue right into Flying Burrito Brothers and not find a clash there. So yeah, this album really worked for me because I appreciated all of the genres that are on here. And I was a big Buffalo Springfield fan, and loved Neil Young, and I thought Young and Stills were the best part of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And Stills has got some good rock chops. He's done some straight blues albums later in his life, so he's got he's got that background there. I appreciated the variety of the album. And when I first got it, I was kind of stunned too, because, I listened to side A and then I flipped over and went to side B. And I'm like you, Scott, I was like, whoa, where'd this come from? I'm hearing, fiddles and, singing about fallen eagles and, and Jesus and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of a shock, if you don't know that it's coming, but you've been warned. So realize that unless you're weird like me, you're not going to probably like everything on here, but there should be something on here that you could find that I think you might like. So,
yeah. And my reading of it, I know some people kind of referred to it as or comparing it to like the Beatles White Album. I'm not, and if you're going to compare to this Beatles White Album, I mean, come on, give me a break. But the point is that the comparison of the Beatles White Album is that there are a bunch of different bases that it covers, and it's sort of a pastiche of different things more than it is sort of a cohesive genre, or sort of a cohesive mission. But anyway, well, thanks for educating us on that, Bob. I do remember when this album was floating around. I do remember hearing of it, but it's not one that I ever went and listened to it, because that just wasn't in my lane. At this time, I was getting pretty heavy into the progressive rock coming out of England. So this didn't fall into that. Thanks for listening, everybody. Join us again. So long.